Hello, and welcome to the final event for me at the Resilience Hub. It is going to be a really excellent session. We're going to hear from lots of people around the world with expertise in built environment and cultural heritage and resilience. And we even might have a musical treat for you if you hang around, courtesy of one of our speakers. Unfortunately, we're having a few problems with the first of our speakers. So I wanted to first introduce myself. I'm Hannah Fluck. I am Head of Environmental Strategy at Historic England, and I am also involved with the Climate Heritage Network, who have helped put together a wonderful range of speakers today. We're going to hear from Mayor Palacios in Cuenca, Ecuador, in a moment. But first, I'm going to play a short video which has been produced by one of my research colleagues who is working on a project looking at cultural heritage and resilience in the UK. And she's going to explain that, and you'll have a link where you can download and view the longer video. Thank you.
I'm Alice Harvey-Fishenden from the Clandidge project at the University of Liverpool, and I've been working with some colleagues at Historic England to make a video about climate change and historic buildings. In the video, I discuss with researchers how we can live with historic buildings in the future and what lessons historic buildings can teach us about living with extreme weather. The video is available now, and I hope you enjoy it.
Thank you, Alice. So do take a moment, grab that QR code, and then you can look at the video at your leisure later on. It features some of the faces that you may hear from today as well. So we're now going to go to our first discussion session. Each of our sessions today is chaired by a member of our Cultural Heritage, Climate Heritage Network Youth Forum, which was launched just last week. So now we're going to go to Rim Kaluazi from the African World Heritage Youth Forum. And we're also going to hear from Carl Elefanti, former president of the American Institute of Architects, and Gul Aktürk from the University of Delft and the Arctic Institute. So, Rim, are you there?
Thank you, Hannah. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Thank you. So, good afternoon, everyone. Good morning from Algiers. Welcome to this first session of Resilience Hub, Cultural Heritage Resilience in the Built Environment, an intergenerational dialogue. My name is Rim Kalwas. I'm a conservation architect and energy efficiency specialist. I work on built heritage conservation, notably in changing climate. I have created, based on the previous research on climate heritage, an initiative called THIN, which means clay or earth in Arabic, which is coupling sustainable preservation with community revitalization actions. The project was awarded the Denis Piéton Award for Social Innovation in 2019 for the MENA region, and now I'm conducting the second part of this research. Besides that, I worked on national and international heritage conservation management and youth engagement projects, including the capacity building project for conservation staff in my country, and the development of the ICROM program dedicated to youth in Africa. I'm pleased to be with you today to discuss how is climate change posing challenges on built heritage. Climate change is affecting directly and indirectly heritage sites, including built heritage sites through the gradual rise in temperature, atmospheric moisture, wind intensity, and sea level rise. Whether they are monuments or cities, of regional or global importance, or of significance to local communities, whether they are of architectural aesthetic value, or vernacular sites that host activities of intangible value. All built heritage sites face the accelerated danger of climate change. Therefore, understanding the current challenges facing cultural heritage is important if it is to be conserved and passed on to future generations. Where are we today in recognizing, understanding, and documenting the impact of climate change on built heritage and vice versa? What solutions are needed today for the adaptation and mitigation of the effects of climate change on built heritage? In today's session, we'll discuss how can we in this climate crisis bring our built heritage from the past to the future. Our first speaker today is Carl Elefante. He's a famous architect, author, advocate. As an internationally recognized subject expert, sustainability is the lens through which Carl Elefante views all dimensions of architecture. Carl emphasizes the importance of designing spaces with the understanding that people thrive in nature and need daylight, movement, fresh air, clean water, but are also social beings that seek engagement and fulfillment. Applying his extensive experience, he brings to projects leadership and pioneering ideas that bind together historical and environmental preservation. He's excited to see the ethic of stewardship extend from historic preservation to sustainability on diverse building types, from the iconic buildings to vernacular and modern infrastructures. Carl, the architect of the greenest building, will tell us how, in the midst of this crisis, can architects reshape the future. Carl, welcome, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Reem. It's wonderful to be here. Thanks so much for the opportunity to be part of the Youth Forum. I don't get a lot of invitations to youth forums anymore. Slides, please. I'm going to go ahead and show a few images and just in a way giving a little bit of an introduction to thinking about cultural heritage through the lens of built heritage. Next slide, please. And it begins by recognizing that built heritage is really part of a network of many types of heritage. And what really unites us with that other heritage is the importance of all of them together telling the human story. Next slide, please. And, you know, I don't think that in this way built heritage is particularly exceptional in that it's terribly fundamental and foundational and important. It does last, however, in ways that other heritage tends to be kind of more ephemeral. So there tends to be quite a lot of it from many different cultures all around the world, and some of it very, very ancient. It's really hard to imagine understanding human history without also understanding built heritage. Next slide, please. Like the other categories of heritage, built heritage is very much under threat from climate change, and in fact is really week in, week out being lost to climate change. And I can tell you from my now long career that this is accelerating. You can see it in real time. Next slide, please. One thing that sets built heritage apart from the other heritage categories is that it is living heritage. Most heritage buildings are occupied buildings. They are being used to lived in schools, etc. From a climate change standpoint, what makes that different than other heritage is that it's literally emitting carbon. It is part of the problem. And therefore, there are many people that are outside the heritage world looking at built heritage as problematic, and it needs to be solved. It's something that needs to be made better. And I don't want to be overly critical of where that leads, but it does not necessarily come with it a sensitivity to what really treatment of built heritage is really appropriate, and really how to work with the inherent advantages of built heritage and the material characteristics of built heritage, et cetera. So there's a real work to be done to bring these two sensibilities together. Next slide, please. So built heritage is part of very large, complex urban systems in many, many locations. So we're really integrated with these larger images and larger solution frameworks of what are we going to do about the building stock and how we're going to decarbonize it anyhow. Next slide, please. It's worthwhile to look at the numbers, and I would say that for us in the heritage sector, we don't spend enough time just crunching the numbers and really trying to understand the lessons. I'll just give you one little lesson from this particular one. This is U.S. non-residential building stock categorized by the decade, more or less, when it was built. As you can see, those traditional buildings are the two orange bars. The blue bars are the mid-century modern buildings that are now at an age where they are either going to need really substantial work done on them, or they will no longer be viable buildings. So suddenly, like it or not, we have the blue bar challenge here that is coming to us as heritage conservators. Are we ready? Do we know what these buildings need? Next slide, please. And I just want to emphasize that you need to get into the details, and when you do, you find the challenges can be very different. And in the US, at least, the difference between the sort of 19th century traditionally constructed buildings and the 20th century modern buildings, they're very different challenges. Next slide, please. There are many opportunities and many different approaches, so I would just encourage you to be thinking about the opportunities of really embracing the cultural heritage dimension of recent heritage, but then also the conservation and preservation challenges of it as well. Next, please. Maladaptation is a term that you hear more and more, and I think that as we are concerned about being climate advocates and being heritage advocates, let's really contribute to this conversation. It's time, we have to step up to this. Next slide, please. We have a lot of the tools, and there's many sources of really what to do and how to do it. Next slide, please. So let's apply it to not just the heritage buildings that we understand, but the next generation of heritage buildings that are coming our way. I think the most important lesson that we can teach is the inherent sustainability and the inherent climate adaptability of the existing building stock. Next, please. And so the roadmap is very clear about operational embodied carbon, the use of renewables. Next. We are here at COP26 getting an update on that, and we should be getting an update on that from the heritage and built heritage conservation perspective. Next, please. And I just want to end by saying, remember that climate change is not happening in a vacuum. There are many, many issues in our communities that we can contribute to by being good stewards of the built heritage and the built environment. Next, please. And last but not least, our condition is one that reminds me a lot of when I was Rim's age, and that is times when big problems come our way, and existential problems come our way, and from my youth, I remember the example of John Kennedy becoming president and saying, this arms race is terrible, and coming up with the idea of turning it into a space race and trying to find a positive human outcome from the scenario that he was faced with. And I think that that's our challenge here. What do we do with climate change to actually make this an opportunity for us to celebrate heritage and really intervene with built heritage in a way that will help all those other crises that we're also facing. So thank you for the opportunity to be here today.
Thank you very much, Carl, for this insightful presentation. Our next speaker is Gul. Gul Aktürk is a visiting fellow at the Architect Institute and a doctoral researcher at the University of TU Delft in the Netherlands. Her research deals with the impacts of climate change on rural built heritage. Her research interest lies in climate adaptation and management of cultural heritage, particularly in the Eastern Black Sea region in Turkey. She has previously worked in several architectural conservation and restoration projects and archaeological excavations. She holds a master's in architectural conservation from the University of Edinburgh. And to date, she published articles related to climate change and other different topics. Gol, the floor is yours.
Thank you for the introduction, and yeah, today I will try to give you a short talk on the impacts of climate change on the rural built heritage, but specifically vernacular heritage sites in the northeast part of Turkey. It's the case. Next slide, please. The case study that I conducted this research is in 2019 in the district of Fındıklı in Rize is located in the northeast part of Turkey, and it receives the highest precipitation and experiences extreme rainfalls, floodings and landslides. But it's also rich with cultural and natural heritage. It's rich with the vernacular built heritage, including stone bridges, stone infilled timber buildings, barns, kilns, and mills. As natural heritage sites, there are a lot of forests and rivers that were listed as a natural heritage site, and also intangible heritage with timber, artisanship, and stone masonry. And these spots you see in the map are the places where I conducted interviews with locals to understand the impacts of climate change on these heritage sites. But the builders on these locations actually used local materials such as stone from nearby rivers and chestnut timber from the forestries to construct the buildings that we see today. Next slide, please. Vernacular settlements were built in a very specific physical, cultural, and socio-economic conditions by local people, relying on the materials and techniques, and these techniques, this traditional knowledge passed down from generations to generations, and climate knowledge is actually embedded in these settlements and lifestyles. Vernacular heritage globally is considered to be resilient and sustainable, but its historical value, integrity, and significance can be adversely affected by the changing climate. Next slide, please. The natural and built environment is decaying due to flooding, landslides, and extreme rainfalls. The loss of infrastructure, storage buildings, and facade deteriorations are some of the examples that we see today. Aside from these challenges, there are much more damage beyond the physical damage, such as maladaptation, loss of traditional knowledge and heritage. And another implication of changing climate is that increasing displacement, increasing migration of agriculture-driven communities from rural areas to urban areas, and rural populations, particularly in mountain valleys, are susceptible to desertification, land and forest degradation, crop failures, threats on the livestock, and abandonment. And these buildings, which survived already 250 years, are now failing to respond to these challenges. And the main reason behind this is that we have forgotten what made them climate resilient in the first place. Next slide, please. In the past, these settlements consist of solely timber-built structures, and the locals used timber for trade, construction of public buildings and residential buildings, and even furnishing, which led to extreme deforestation in the area. So due to deforestation, they switched to the stone infilled timber construction that we see today, and there was no need to construct retaining walls behind these houses or along the rivers at the time. But together with the opening of the roads and for vehicles and transportation, and also clearing of some of the forest for tea crops or construction of new buildings. The deforestation grew in time, and this led to an increase in the landslide risks. And the roof overhangs, which extended to 150 centimeter, is no longer the case because of the late practices. People renovated their buildings, and these roof overhangs extend less than 100 centimeter, which doesn't protect the buildings to extreme rainfalls anymore. So the practices that we see later in this period that made these buildings vulnerable to the current conditions. And some of these buildings have concrete extensions which keep the humidity and cold, especially in the winter season. Next slide, please. The construction technique called chakatura that you see on the right image on the first floor, which is the plastered facade, is found to be extremely vulnerable to rainwater, and it decays faster. This is why we have a rare example of this today. And when these buildings are neglected by by the building owner, rainfall can destroy the whole building. The wide eaves of the roof can protect the house against humidity and precipitation. So when it's renovated, it should follow these measures to keep the building secure from these damages. And the major difficulty is to also renovate these buildings, especially the roofs, which cost the most in the maintaining of these buildings. And people are nowadays constructing their buildings along the river fronts, which made them vulnerable to the floods. So we need to analyze the impacts of climate change along with the anthropic influences and pressures from top-down and bottom-up decisions and practices, including deforestation, changes in land use, consumption habits, population growth, and urbanization. And thank you for listening.
Thank you, Gol, for the presentation. As we are running short of time, we'll move to the question session. The first question is directed to Carl. So 14 years after the famous greenest building paper and code that sparked a large public interest and awareness, with climate change accelerating, how have the challenges posed by climate change on built heritage changed?
Thanks for the question. It's a big one with many different answers depending on where and the characteristics of the building stock and so on. What I would say is that number one, there's almost nowhere in the world where the changing climate isn't changing the conditions that affect the conservation of built heritage. And again, I live in the U.S. Most of what I know is about the U.S. Factors. But if you look at a national risk factor map, there's not much blank space on there. Literally, almost every region of the country has their own version of what the threats are to the built heritage in that area. Each of those has kind of built-in conservation challenges. Then when you look across the history of the building stock itself, as the building stock has evolved, as the material uses and the design concepts that go with the building stock have evolved over time, each of those is another set of circumstances for where the conservation challenges really come in. So I'll just give you one specific example. With I'm in the Washington D.C. area. The main thing that we're experiencing is much heavier rainfall. Really, almost monsoon-like conditions. I live in an area where I've lived there long enough so I can tell you that what I've experienced over the last couple of years is truly exceptional. We had a rainfall last May where I had 4 rivers. I had one on each side of my house. There's no rivers near my house. Just unbelievable amount of rainfall. So what you're beginning to see is buildings that are absorptive buildings, traditional brick with lime mortar and so on, that have done fine for a couple of hundred years, now being exposed to levels of moisture that they're just not used to. So it's a whole new conservation world that we're facing.
Thank you, Carl. The second question goes to Go. How do you think our local knowledge could assist in understanding the impact of climate change on built heritage, especially from the example of Turkey?
So I think that these practices, local knowledge, local practices are changing, and they are evolving. So the evolution of the historical evolution of these practices and this knowledge is actually something that we need to investigate, because they are changing, and some of them we are holding on to, and some of them we are leaving behind. And when you see these examples, some of them are actually still surviving, and what makes them still resilient, whereas we lose some. And why are we losing some of these? There are practices that are not so climate resilient. So we need to look at those both failing and surviving examples of heritage, and to analyze these failing, why these structures are failing, or why they are surviving. And from the examples I have seen is that they also experience this, and they also realize what is working and what is not working. So we need more research on this topic to document and realize it's not just documenting what's there, but to analyze the history of it, and also listen to locals, like bottom-up practices, and what these practices are leading to. Are these making these buildings more vulnerable than they are, or are there any good examples of preserving them? Because there are also maladaptation examples that we need to look at and compare where we are doing wrong and where we are doing right.
Thank you, Go. Another question for Carl. As the situation is becoming more and more serious, how do you think policy could drive action, especially regarding the emergency of the situation?
Thank you. We dropped the mic, so now we don't know which one works. But thank you ever so much, Carl, Gul and Rim, for that really fascinating introduction to a lot of the issues. I think the message there is it's about the buildings and the people and the places. I suspect we might hear a little bit more about some of that. I'm told that we can now go to Ecuador, that Mayor Palacios, Mayor of Cuenca, Ecuador, and former Climate Heritage Network co-chair is ready to speak to us. The mayor is going to speak in Spanish, and we have prepared some translation of the comments that he will make, which will be visible on the screen for you. So, Mayor Palacios, bienvenido.
Muchísimas gracias. Muy buenas tardes, muy buenas noches, según el lugar en donde ubicados cada uno de ustedes. Quiero agradecer el espacio y el tiempo que nos han dispensado para poder comentar algunos temas relevantes. Un saludo cordial a todos, absolutamente a todos de CHN y por supuesto a quienes me acompañan en los diferentes paneles. El patrimonio no es estático, el patrimonio es dinámico. Y bajo esta premisa, la posibilidad de generar patrimonio constantemente es fundamental. Sin embargo, desafortunadamente, la sociedad se ha convertido en una sociedad de descarte versus una sociedad de conservación. Y eso para mí es importante ponerlo de manifiesto en este momento. La posibilidad cierta de que a través de la conservación entendamos que los pueblos, las ciudades, los seres humanos podemos ser resilientes, saber que podemos manejar y adecuar las diferentes escalas de patrimonio, sea esta material, inmaterial, mueble, inmueble, arqueológico, documental, etcétera, es parte fundamental de la sostenibilidad como sociedad. La vorágine de crecimiento, la explosión demográfica, la, diría yo, escalonada de producción ha hecho que expulsemos a la sociedad, a los habitantes, hacia las periferias de la parte urbana, haciendo que los lugares ya no densificados, los lugares patrimoniales y la parte urbana que sí está consolidada con servicios básicos, permita o no permita más bien que los ciudadanos hacia la periferia no tengan esa capacidad. Hemos desplazado a la humanidad a nuevos entornos donde la dotación de servicios básicos hace que el consumo de áreas verdes, de la necesidad de mayor o un incremento mucho más fuerte económico para dotar de servicios básicos, no nos permita llegar a todos de buena forma. Mientras que en los lugares condensados que tienen todos los servicios, vamos reduciendo la cantidad de personas o habitantes por hectárea. Se pierden espacios verdes hacia el interior que se transforman en nuevas edificaciones o tan sencillo, parqueaderos para vehículos, cuando otrora o antes teníamos jardines, teníamos huertos, podíamos cultivar. La construcción patrimonial tiene saberes ancestrales, usos de productos o de materias primas locales, donde confluye incluso la familia en un momento dado a la preservación y conservación. Hacia una nueva modernidad que no es que esté mal, está muy bien. Dejamos de lado estos elementos que son importantes y nos basamos únicamente en un proceso de consumo y extractivismo que lo que hace es que tengamos superávit de inventarios mucho más de lo que realmente se requiere consumir. La sostenibilidad ambiental viene dada de un adecuado y manejo consumo de los recursos naturales y la sostenibilidad económica viene dada de un consumo adecuado de los elementos de la producción, de la economía, de la agricultura, para justamente los habitantes que actualmente tenemos. ¿Qué hacemos en Cuenca? Estamos recuperando la densificación en las áreas urbanas donde ya se dotan de servicios básicos. Estamos creando la quinta fachada, una quinta fachada para recuperar el verde, para recuperar la vegetación y dejar de ser aquella quinta fachada de azoteas, de techos que realmente no contribuyen absolutamente en nada. El cambio climático, como lo hemos conversado en más de una ocasión, está presente y debemos recuperar aquellos espacios, dinámicas, la reducción de los efectos, trabajar fuertemente a través de esta recuperación mediante el patrimonio y mediante las estructuras de generación constructivas ancestrales para que precisamente no tengamos lo que estamos viendo hoy en día con sequías en tiempos mayores o inundaciones o precipitaciones fuertemente. La tarea es de todos, la tarea no es de unos pocos. Por lo tanto, en este foro invito a todas aquellas personas que se sumen precisamente a que sepamos que mediante la conservación patrimonial podemos darle un respiro una vez más a nuestro planeta. Aprovecho un paréntesis para agradecer a quienes nos permitieron durante un tiempo estar en la vicepresidencia justamente de Patrimonio y Cambio Climático, la cual fue entregada la semana pasada y esperamos poder seguir contribuyendo en los espacios que ustedes así lo permitan. Muchísimas gracias.
Muchas gracias, Mayor Palacios, and thank you very much for joining us this evening. We're now going to move to our second panel. So I'd like to introduce Priyanka Panjwani, who is joining us virtually. Priyanka is also a member of our Climate Heritage Youth Panel, and she is an architect coordinator at ICOMOS India, and on the National Scientific Committee for Risk Preparedness. I'd also like to introduce Ibrahim Chan, who is joining us here at the COP. Ibrahim is the Executive Director of the Corps des Volontaires Béninois, the Corps of Benin Volunteers. He's a lawyer and a musician, and is director and co-founder of the Tata Somba Eco Museum, the first ecological museum in West Africa. And also joining us virtually is my colleague Morwenna Slade. Morwenna is Head of Historic Building and Climate Change Adaptation at Historic England. Welcome. Priyanka, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Hannah, for the welcome and the kind introduction. Namaste and greetings from India. And thank you all for joining us. I'm Priyanka Panjwani, a conservation architect from Mumbai. Mumbai, my hometown, is a metropolitan coastal city that is at risk of total submergence by 2050 due to rising sea levels as per reports. The built environment around us is at risk of extreme and unpredictable weather events due to climate change. I believe that we need to re-examine our existing assets with a new perspective, and we need to do so now. Looking at the timber architecture in the Himalayan region, the cluster pole housing in warmer climates, bamboo houses of the northeast, or the indigenous coastal settlements, India is home to a wide range of traditional architecture. Globally, we have diverse traditions, a great potential to recognize the value of a historic architecture and to apply the wisdom for the cause of climate adaptation. I'm honored to welcome you as a chair in this session where we will try to address the questions: what can we learn from our traditional and historical built heritage, and how is this knowledge relevant for climate resilience? Joining me today, first will be presenting and speaking Ibrahim Chan, who is the Executive Director of the Corps Benin Volunteers. The floor is all yours, Ibrahim.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Priyanka, for your presentation. And I'm very happy to be here to speak about vernacular heritage. I need a slide, a presentation, please. Okay, thank you. The name of my presentation is the Takienta and Laboratory of Climate Heritage. We can see what we can learn from this heritage. Next slide, please. So I came here to make a storytelling about this lady. And I think that when I finish this story, I can go to Benin and I finish my presentation. I hope you agree with me. Okay, as you can look on the picture, this small lady, the name is, these children is Tempa. Tempa have his face for the future, but the hand in the past. Why in the past? In the past because many long time, slide please, the people of Tempa use local materials like have to make construction, donc to build this beautiful home. And it's not just the home, it's not just for the living, it's also for the spiritual, for the connection between the world where we are living here and the world where we will live after we die. So the first floor is for the living room, But when for the people who is physical living, and when you go to the top, you have another space for the food, for the bedroom, also for the animals, etc. So next slide, please. So, and what we are going to do, what is our work, because this heritage is threatened, is going to disappear. So we are going to, we create some like school, traditional school. You know, it's not possible to go to university to learn about how to build sakienta. It's not possible to go to small school to learn about this. So the only way we have to learn is workshop to build together. But the oldest people is going to die with all this knowledge. You know, the man who is architect of this build, name is Otamari. Otamari means the man who use have to build, you know. And when he wants to build these houses, he's not going to use computer. He's not going to use ASCII. He's not going to use anything like this. Everything is in demand, you know. And he's going to use all knowledge in demand. How we can work with him to transmit this knowledge for the new generation. So we create this school, and we make like a groups between youth and whole generation, and we make a community work hard. You can see on the picture, this is the man who is Otamari. Otamari means architect, you know, and he's a principal architect, but he has apprentice who is learning like he's in the school. Next slide, please. So I also want to talk about community work, community engagement, and also women work in the step of building these houses. Because to build these houses is not the work for one person. It's community work, and all community, like women, like children, like youth, like oldest people, all of them have a role in all the process of building these houses. The woman is in charge of decoration, also in charge of finishing of the building, and to make this work, they're going to use local materials. So what is these local materials we are going to see? Next slide, please. Okay, for the stability and the intensity, they are using vegetal materials, animal materials, and also agriculture waste. So this step is only the step they use power. So in all the process of building these houses, they are not going to use electricity energies. They just need to use power to have this painting is for the painting. So this is only the step we use the power, and is not the electricity. Is just is fire. So it's important to know that, because we are talking about how we can build without more power, because in Africa we don't have electricity, we don't have more electricity. Next slide, please. And you can see that we have many local materials who come from animals, from also vegetal, and also natural materials. And we can see that we have this is from agriculture. This is line. This is from animals, and this also is vegetal materials. And all this is mixed for two reasons. The first reason is to respect environment. The second is to have bioclimatical houses, because they have possibility to change. When it's cold outside, it will be hot inside, and when it's hot inside, it will be cold outside. Next slide, please. So when they use all these natural materials, they build these beautiful houses, beautiful home. As you can see, and all is natural, all is local materials, and is very, 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 very nice. And what we can learn from all this traditional knowledge, what we can learn to use it on maybe modern architecture. Next slide, please. Okay, you see that is a very, very, very beautiful house, right? So they teach us it's very important to respect environment. So you to build these houses, they are not going to destroy anything around the place. They just build it, and with connection between environments, between all of important place of this site. Also, they teach us about, as I was saying, about natural air conditioner, because it's hot at this place in West Africa. So in the modern architecture, we see that people is going to use air conditioner, and it needs more power, more electricity. We don't have electricity. So we have to build something like this and have natural ventilation, you know. And they know that it's important to make orientation of this heritage to have natural ventilation. So we can learn from them how in modern architecture we can make orientation. Also we can learn about the comfort, the health, because all the materials they use to build is good for the health. It's not like modern material who can be very dangerous for the health. Next slide, please. And also we can learn about design. You can see that it's very kind design, and you see there are many places, see, and it's different, it's not the same. You have 5 types of this heritage. You can see that it's very amazing and very design it, and it can, the modern architect can use it to more innovation in the architecture. Also to about the organization in the room, because how to manage space on the room and to use it more better. They have also this knowledge. Next slide, please. And then, how about resilience? About this heritage, because we have the same challenge. We have one planet, and we have like the same problem. And this heritage is going to disappear, as I was saying. And one of the reasons is climate change. So we need resilience. And for us, resilience means also to be independent, to have economical resource, to prepare this resilience. So one way to prepare community about this resilience is community engagement. And between community engagement, we can use traditional know-how with this, all these women who already knows how to use local materials, and maybe have the materials we can sell for the building of modern architecture. So, and also we need to connect this traditional know-how with university to make a research. And now, and then we can perform some new materials who will be more sustainable, more, who will be more sustainable about climate change. Next slide, please. Okay, and in the end, I just want to say that Tempa has her bedroom here. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Ibrahim, for sharing with us the climate-sensitive traditional earthen architecture of the Bata Mariba Society in Togo and Benin. There's a lot to learn from this example, from the technical aspect to the social aspect of how traditional building brings the community together, something which also finds resonance in the Indian way of life, I think. I will come back to you if there is time for questions, but we'll move on to our next panelist, who is Morvena Slade, who's the head of historic building climate change adaptation at Historic England. She leads a team based in the National Specialist Services Department that provides technical advice and guidance on the maintenance, repair, and adaptation of historic buildings. Thank you, Morvena, for joining us. And let's talk to you about your work and research in energy efficiency of traditional buildings in the UK. Could you please give us an overview of the types of historic buildings that you've worked on? And I want to know your thoughts on their energy performance.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the introduction. It's amazing to follow that presentation, the difference and yet the similarities. So I'm a chartered building surveyor, and I've had the joy of working on a real wide range of UK buildings, from small single cell Saxon churches in rural areas and vernacular barns and housing, through to sort of large urban traditional buildings, large churches that have been converted from church use into circus schools, and also I've worked a lot on domestic housing. So I've run rental estates in rural areas for tenanted properties. So I've really worked on a huge range of domestic and non-domestic traditional buildings across the UK. And I think you mentioned the kind of my thoughts on energy efficiency about the buildings. It's really interesting when you look at the energy efficiency side of things. You can discuss materials performance and design performance, and whether we get the servicing right, but really our energy efficiency comes down to the people that use the buildings and the way that their expectations. And no matter whether the building was sort of built in 800s or whether it was built in the 1800s, very few of our traditional buildings in the UK are used for the thing that they were built for. And very little is the same. So we have new services in traditional buildings, and some of our most spectacular Grade 1 listed buildings are now used as visitor attractions, and that has cafes and it has services. And we have a real sort of balancing act in terms of our energy efficiency in these buildings, because we have these expectations of high visitor numbers or collection care, and yet they were designed for maybe to work as a kitchen, or maybe to work as a domestic setting where people would be around the fireplace in the winter. It really comes down to our expectations of the buildings and the energy efficiency. But I suppose one thing I would say is that, all buildings, traditional and modern, and I'd love to pick up on that aspect that Carl mentioned, which was the modern buildings. The conservation of the modern buildings is a really tricky task to meet, and how they're going to perform in climate change scenarios, the way that we maintain them, the way that we want to use them, and the way that we adapt them is more challenging than the traditional buildings. The design details and the way that we use them in terms of energy is completely different, and it's such a fascinating challenge to be considering at this point.
Thank you. That's great. It will definitely make economic and environmental sense to adapt and improve the performance of historic structures. Can you tell us how retrofit can be done while ensuring that conservation principles are maintained?
Absolutely. So, I mean, I think it's really important to say that we have an expectation of our traditional buildings, and that we know that retrofitting them can be challenging, especially when we're looking at really maintaining the significance. What is significant about our structures? And I think in the past we've really looked at sort of the idea that we can't change the buildings, and yet, as I mentioned, very few of our buildings are being used for what they were used and what they were built for. So we know we can, and it's one of the joys of the conservation world is looking at balancing how we get the new use out of the traditional building and we maintain that significance. And the challenges of retrofit are really looking at what is significant and what the building is going to be used for and what level of comfort do we want out of this building. So we have an issue with, there's domestic retrofit in the UK. So the UK has, it's a well known figure of the kind of the oldest building stock in Europe, and there's a real element of cold and leaky houses, but they can all be upgraded. It's about using the right materials in the right way and also understanding what makes them significant. Ultimately, the conservation of our traditional buildings is as much about what is important and what we value as a society as it is to making ourselves warm. We can retrofit a building and we can get it technically right. I don't think it's a technical problem anymore. It's a social decision-making problem. It's an economic problem. But we know how to retrofit well. We know the materials we need to use, the vapor open materials for traditional buildings. Make sure that you get the materials that match that of the original structure. You can use vapor closed materials, insulation materials in more modern buildings. But really, the decision is how far do we want to push the fabric and how far do we want to accept loss? And I think that loss and accepting change in especially a sort of a highly significant building it's going to be needed to manage climate change adaptation. But that doesn't mean that we have to lose everything, and it doesn't mean that we shouldn't make every effort to understand what's important and work the technical around the socially important.
Thank you. Just quickly, last question. What according to you must be done for the maintenance of historic buildings? Because maintaining it well will make the performance better and it will last longer.
So I personally think that maintenance is our single biggest adaptation action that we can take. It's our least costly, and it sort of helps every single building and every single person. So in terms of maintenance programs for all buildings, and I mean domestic buildings, so owner occupied buildings and our larger commercial buildings, we need to be more agile. We need to understand that maintenance and making sure that our gutters don't top over, and if they do, we act quite fast. It stops the fabric becoming really saturated. And I think that we need to make sure that we understand that the small actions have a big impact in terms of how our efficiency works. So energy efficiency, if the systems within the buildings are not maintained well, they don't work particularly efficiently, and they use more energy. So, how the building functions all largely comes down to maintenance. And even if we do retrofit and we do improve the buildings and we do adapt them, those adaptations still need maintenance. We can't retrofit and walk away. We will need, in 15 years time, in 20 years time, the maintenance of that building is still going to be needed. So really sort of looking to the smaller actions and understanding that it's an incremental response to the climate change that we're faced with is the easiest thing that we can do to look after our buildings and make sure that they're there and useful and loved for the future.
Thank you so much. Ibrahim, if you're around, there's one question for you. How would you document the traditional practice that you showed in Togo and Benin so that it can be transferred to the future generations? All right, I think we have less time. Thank you.
Yeah. Yes.
And over to the next session then.
Thank you. As I was saying in the presentation, the way we have to make documentation is to also make workshop to build, because we can't make documentation without building. So we work with local community and take this time to record, to make a research, to speak with people and make like numerization. So we are going to have a database about step by step which material they use, why they use it, and how we can preserve, we can save it for the next generation. So we use also technology like camera, like application, like also we also use 3D program to make a plan, yes, and to rebuild virtually a house like Takienta and make all this documentation have information.
Thank you so much. Over to the next session.
Thank you, Priyanka, Mwena, and Ibrahim. I think that was a really fascinating, as Mwena said, seeing some of the similarities between Benin and the UK around that need to maintain, to understand the fabric and the material of the buildings, and to make sure that you include that when you're trying to use them in the future. On to our third and final panel now. I want to welcome Yolo from Mexico. Yolo is ICOMOS Mexico and the ICOMOS Emerging Professional Working Group. Also Rosie Paul, who is here. So Rosie is an architect and director of Masons Inc. India. You may also have spotted her from COP TV earlier today. And also Shannon Miller, Historic Preservation Director in San Antonio and the new Climate Heritage Network co-chair for North America. So Yolo, over to you.
Thank you very much, Hannah, and thank you very much to everyone there in Glasgow. Well, as you said, I'm from Mexico. I'm an architect. I'm also a conservationist. And recently I participated in the organization of the CHN Youth Forum together with Rim, Luis and Pravalli, who are not here, and Priyanka also was there as a speaker. So I'm very pleased to be here with colleagues that I know very well. And without further ado, I just want to share with you that as a conservationist, I'm writing my thesis on conservation and restoration of immovable assets, and it is related to the identity, how it is formed in a community where there is earthen architecture, and the fact that not even a declaration of protected heritage area will create identity. It responds to different processes. And I would like now to introduce our first speaker, that it will be Rosie Paul. Rosie Paul is a principal architect of Masons Inc. Studio, a design and construction firm based out of India, focused on heritage conservation and sustainable development. She has specialized in earthen architecture and sustainable habitats from Crater in France, the UNESCO Chair for Earthen Architecture and Heritage. So welcome, Rosie. Thank you for being here.
Hello, Jolo. If we could have the presentation on. So, when I was asked to speak at this session, which which meant how is culture accessed, conserved, shared and relearned. I struggled a little bit because when you speak about access to culture, it feels like it's inaccessible in some way. And in India, we're so strongly, still very strongly rooted in our culture and tradition. So culture is not really accessed, but it's a way of life. It's in the everyday. It's in everything. And as we move from our urban landscapes to our rural landscapes, we see more unadulterated versions of ways in which culture and climate kind of mold our built environment as well. Next slide. And they really sculpt even the simplest of things, like how one responds to the inside and the outside, from simple to elaborate entrances, and even the details of windows and smaller elements. Next slide, please. And when we speak of culture, it not only helps in defining the built fabric, but it also helps in the maintenance and repair of them. So religious festivals, traditions, and customs actually meant people came together and spent time to work on their houses. And that was actually also a kind of prayer that was being done as a gesture to kind of pay homage to the god that they were celebrating. Next slide, please. And what's interesting is culture is such a strong rooted memory that even once the built fabric disappears, the culture remains. Next slide, please. So this is an interesting image where the previous image showed you something very much in context, where somebody was working on the repair and maintenance of the house, and they were celebrating the house for a festival. Whereas this is a similar thing that's happening out of context. This is a petrol station, and what's really going on the ground, if you notice the yellow that you notice, and you see two women working on the side, is that they're mixing cow dung and turmeric and spreading it around the building. And this actually comes from a tradition of doing the same thing on earthen floors, which was part of a festival where they cleaned. It was a part of a cleaning process. And actually the cow dung and the turmeric helped as an insecticide as well. And it helped in water resistance to the otherwise sensitive earthen floors. Next slide. And what we need to pay attention to is that we see that even our vernacular, even our rural landscapes are disappearing in terms of the traditional built environment, thanks to infiltration of industrial materials or misunderstood intervention of what is actually resilient structures. And this image actually shows, this is just the panoramic view where you see the vernacular buildings, and then you see additions creeping in. They stick out like a sore thumb. And this is something that we really need to avoid and see how we can try and prevent this from actually happening. Next slide, please. And how we can do that is, at the core of it, just understanding that a built environment does not exist in isolation. It is not a unidimensional element. It actually is a part of a complex ecosystem. And at the core and center of it are the people. And the solutions that we think of providing in the name of resilience need to include them, and need to include the knowledge systems that they already have. And innovation and research on these systems can not only provide more place-adaptive solutions, but also give us clues to how how we can respond to urban challenges and issues that we're facing in the urban context. Next slide, please. So this is just an example of what I was talking about that we are working on, we at Masons Inc., where there is this knowledge of natural additives. I think Ibrahim was speaking about it earlier as well from Africa. And even in India, we have a lot of this local knowledge where people were using natural additives to strengthen their structures. And we are right now researching and looking at scientific proof to see if there's actually a change in the way the material functions when this is added. So that in the end, we hope to maybe go back to these low carbon additives instead of the high energy, high carbon additives we're using right now in mainstream construction. I'd like to end with this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rosie, for your amazing presentation. Indeed, your work is very interesting. I already have a question for you, but I won't make it until we present our next speaker. That actually, she's here with us, but she also sent us her presentation pre-recorded. So I want to introduce Shannon Shea Miller. Ms. Miller came to San Antonio from the city of Franklin, Tennessee, where she served as the Historic Preservation Officer. In San Antonio, she became the city's Historic Preservation Officer and Director of the Office of Historic Preservation, OHP, in November 2008. Under Shannon's leadership, OHP implements an award-winning program that includes extensive education and outreach, technical training, a comprehensive designation initiative, design and development review, the city's vacant building program, and the Living Heritage program. So, welcome, Shannon. So please, could you play her video?
Hello, I'm Shannon Miller, the director of the city's Office of Historic Preservation in San Antonio, Texas. OHP has been working to perpetuate the living heritage of San Antonio through trades education for over a decade. Most recently with the launch of the Living Heritage Trades Academy, which teaches traditional carpentry skills as well as deconstruction under the direction of skilled master craftsmen. We started in 2010 with an event called STAR, Students Together Achieving Revitalization. STAR works to arrest deterioration of San Antonio's historic housing stock through service learning opportunities for architecture and construction science students. Today, OHP offers training in preservation trades from window repair to porch restoration and traditional carpentry. Through the Trades Academy, we work with local partners to host 10-week paid apprenticeships that prepare people for careers in traditional trades. San Antonio has a heritage of talented and skilled trade practitioners, but those skills may be lost. Studies have shown that half of traditional tradespeople are over the age of 45. A looming shortage of contractors who have experience working with historic building materials and who understand the importance of maintaining the unique characteristics local to San Antonio is a climate heritage concern. With a well-stocked pool of trained traditional trade practitioners, historic building owners have increased access to affordable alternatives to the removal of materials or demolition of existing buildings. Our traditional trade efforts are important to climate action in many ways, including disaster recovery and pre-recovery. It is also directly connected to advancing the circular economy, which is one of 6 community mitigation strategies outlined in the city's climate action plan. The circular economy not only eliminates negative environmental impacts and creates new sources of value, but also can be used to bridge the wealth divide and create new pathways for upward mobility. In that vein, OHP has been leading a deconstruction initiative. We use an organ donor analogy. If a structure cannot be saved intact, its parts and pieces could help extend the lives of dozens of other historic structures. Instead of going to buy completely new products to replace damaged or missing historic materials, a vibrant materials reuse industry allows historic building stewards to source period-appropriate materials to sustain their structures, all while reusing what is already made and decreasing dependence on new materials. The following video will explain more.
So we're here at the Kelso House, and this is a house designed by Atlee Vieres in the Monte Vista Historic District. It was built in 1906. It is now serving as one of our climate heritage learning labs for the Power of Preservation Foundation, and also as a site for the Office of Historic Preservation's Living Heritage Trades Academy. We are working in partnership with Lake Plato Architects to achieve zero carbon certification from the International Living Future Institute. So the thing that's exciting about it, it is the first residential and really one of the first similar designation in San Antonio. And the idea is really to showcase that historic rehabilitation can and fairly easily can be carbon neutral, because look around, we're reusing all this fabulous material. We have all this valuable old growth wood. You can see all around us there are materials that were taken out of either this site when an addition was removed, or other places that we're able to put back to good use in this historic building.
In San Antonio, for us to achieve the goals of the Climate Action Adaptation Plan, it's very important that we reduce the number of buildings that are being demolished, which right now numbers about 450 a year, very similar to other cities. Demolition, in addition to generating a lot of waste, also introduces toxicity into the environment and emissions. A circular economy is one that aims to reduce waste by taking supply materials from the end of the supply chain to the beginning, and thereby reducing the level of waste and toxicity that's introduced in the environment. Different parts of a building being reused allows us to preserve the life of the previous building, but gives life to additional structures as time moves on.
We do have finite resources, so you have to really think about that. How much water are you using for new construction versus the material that's already been developed? Deconstruction is almost one of the perfect ways to do it. Landfill space reductions, trying to make certain we minimize that. Deconstruction is really a key component.
We don't want this high quality material to end up in the landfill. And so any effort to reclaim material and reuse it is important. If you don't have that material, what are we going to use? And that just creates and prolongs and expands our dependence on new material, which is not sustainably produced in many cases. And so we really want to focus on having the access to that material, both from an environmental standpoint, but then also from a community equity standpoint. There's so much value captured in these materials. If we don't have much of it in the market, then the prices are very high, and that makes access to it difficult for people who have more limited incomes. And so we really want to make sure that people who are reinvesting in their homes, and people who are rehabilitating affordable housing units, for example, have access to these high quality materials.
Well, thank you very much, Shannon, for sharing this amazing video and project that you lead. Indeed, the work you are doing there in San Antonio is amazing. So I would like to start first with a question for you, and then I would like to have Rosie answer another question so that she in Glasgow could do it live. First, well, I would like to ask you, Shannon, what you think about the role of universities, of architecture faculties exactly, in the conservation of traditional knowledges. How do you think that they are contributing or making this panorama worse for the conservation of heritage?
Sure. Thank you, Yolo. That's a great question. It is actually something that we've been focused on a great deal here in San Antonio. I've served for many years on the advisory council for the College of Architecture at the University of Texas at San Antonio. And part of that is about how to get the architecture school and the architecture students more engaged in the community. And part of that focus has been on traditional trades and traditional skills, and really understanding that, when a lot of times students in the United States, and I think based on our conversations in Mexico and in other places, students are in architecture school focusing on building new buildings and working with new materials. But in reality, their jobs are more likely to end up dealing with existing buildings, historic or not. And we know that we absolutely have to deal with our existing building stock in a positive way in order to address climate challenges. And so we took on the Students Together Achieving Revitalization initiative as a way to combine arresting deterioration of our housing stock and reinvesting in those important buildings with really teaching the students and giving them hands-on opportunities to learn about how building materials work and how buildings were constructed. And so I think that's something that's really important and can be replicated in a lot of communities.
Thank you very much for your answer. Indeed, it enlightens our pathway. And now I would like to ask Rosie about. I remember from her presentation that she mentioned that for a resilient future, we should consider the knowledges that communities already have. And I would like to know what she thinks about, what do you think, Rosie, about this thing that sometimes in the communities they are not very linked to the vernacular architecture because there are like a massive bombarding every day from the media and society and everything, telling that this is an architecture that is for the poor people, and they don't want to feel like they are not developed, right? So here in Mexico, we have when building with different materials other than traditional materials, people will always say that they are building their house with material, with that word, like as if the other materials were not materials. So I wanted to know how you think that we as conservationists can link again the identity of communities with their traditional knowledges, and if you have some example like this in India.
Thank you, Jolo. And I think the question is very relevant because, as you said, the local communities have been bombarded with notions of how what they already know is not good enough and what they live in is weak. And I think it's not a solution that it cannot be treated instantly, because it's been years of years of them being told that what they live in is not good enough. And now suddenly their voices are being heard, and then there are people saying that, no, what you live in actually has half the solutions that everyone is searching for. But I think it comes from slowly working with them on even newer housing situations, working with them and showing them that we still prefer using their techniques to the industrial ones that are not locally available or that are hard to find. So I think it comes from a sort of resensitization to the benefits that they have, and also involving the larger community, because very often we tend to say, okay, this is the rural community and this is the urban community, or these are the professionals or the architects and these are the local members who build their own houses. And I think bringing everyone together through outreach programs and through innovative community constructions where one can learn from each other would be one of the ways where they can feel proud and feel ownership on the things that are built, and we can all build it together. So that's one of the ways that we can probably treat this issue.
Thank you very much, Rosie. And from my end, I think we are near to the end. So I only want to say thank you to Hannah and everyone organizing this event. Thank you to Rosie and Shannon and all of the speakers and other chairs. It was a pleasure for me to be here today.
Brilliant. Well, thank you. I think that was a whistle-stop tour around the world and the many different ways in which we relate to our buildings and the ways in which we need to perhaps better understand what they do, what they can help us to live better, more resilient for the future. There's a few themes, I think, that were coming through in all of those speakers. There's one around that looking at the local conditions and the ways in which the challenges that those local conditions have presented, the ways in which people have responded, and the ways in which buildings are or aren't coping, and how we can learn from that. But most importantly, when it's the local conditions, I think often we default to thinking about buildings and their environment. And I think everybody made that point that it's about the people, actually, and buildings working for the people, providing a safe place for people to live and work. And so recognizing that all of those social, economic and environmental context for our buildings is interlinked. And I think, as Carl said, that climate change is also just part of a wider network of the challenges that we're facing, and having to find a way to think through some of these, the systems, the connectedness of these issues. And I think we heard about how in some places that relationship hasn't been broken, and so you've still got people who are recognizing the importance of the social context of things like the routines of maintenance, of recognizing that you need to involve all generations in how you undertake repairs to buildings, and that intergenerationality, is that even a word, how that can help us to think about how we put people at the heart of these decisions into the future, but how we keep that knowledge going, how we can learn from those challenges, those experiences. And I think also that how that can be both formal through those relationships with universities, but also informal, and perhaps valuing a little bit more the community of people that includes not just the people living in those, the people in what we'd normally sort of think of as a community, a village, a settlement, a city, but also the communities that involve different sorts of expertise, and valuing and understanding that amongst ourselves a bit better. So I want to thank everybody for listening online, everyone in the room, and all of our speakers for joining us today. I'm going to hand over now to our resident musician who's going to play us out. So Ibrahim brought his guitar to COP, and we couldn't let it pass without a performance. So you're in for a real treat, ladies and gentlemen. Ibrahim, over to you.
Aole manake ne wasan andul nyane andul nyaye la tomasi makani lelen kandul nyane ta andul nyaye la tomasi makacha he sota ulente palo lamto lalla ko kankesi makala wena le ke andul nyane ta malakisna 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 hielem 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 yo hielem 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 yo hielem 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 yo hielem yo Tomasi makani lelen kandul nyeneta andulunya yela tomasi makaja hesota malakisna 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 Do you want to sing? Right? Okay. I can teach you. Heal him, yo. Heal him, yo. Heal him, yo. Heal him, yo. Together. Heal him, yo. Heal him, yo. Heal him, yo. Heal him, yo. Again. Heal him, yo. Heal him, yo. Heal him, yo. Heal him, yo. Andulinya yela tomasi, makani lelen kandulinya neta. Andulinya yela tomasi, makacha hesuta. Malakisna, 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 malakisna. Heal him, yo. Heal him, yo. Heal him, yo. Heal him, yo. Heal him. Heal him, yo. Heal him, yo. Heal him, yo. Heal him, yo. Thank you.